Hi, I'm Max Keiser. Welcome to On the Edge. Time now to go to New York and talk with economist and author Dr. Michael Hudson. Dr. Hudson is the author of Super Imperialism, and he blogs at michael-hudson.com. Dr. Hudson, welcome to On the Edge.
Thank you very much, Max.
Now, last week in Ireland, journalist Vincent Browne asked an ECB technocrat why it was that the Irish people had to be bail out unsecured bond holders. I assume he was talking about Anglo-Irish. Now, the ECB technocrat refused to answer the question. So can you answer the question for us, Dr. Hudson?
The reason that the taxpayers of Ireland have to pay to bail out the stockholders and bondholders of banks is because the class war is back in business, but it's not taking the kind of character that the class war took 100 years ago. It's not between employers and employees over wage labor. The financial sector is using this crisis as a grab to get bailouts from the state. They call it socializing the losses, but it would be more apt to call it oligarchizing the losses. You're having a financial oligarchy take over elected government, as you're seeing in Greece, putting its own appointed central bank officials acting as lobbyists for the commercial banks running the country, or else, as in Ireland, getting a unwitting political leader who doesn't realize that he's giving away the whole store to the financial sector when they say, well, look, if you don't bail us out, if you don't push your population into a decade of depression, if you don't force your people to emigrate, then there's going to be a financial breakdown of the deposits and the monetary system. Now, the reality is there won't be a breakdown at all. In the United States, Citibank in 2008, after the Lehman crisis, and Sheila Bair who was head of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation here, had a long argument with Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner. Apparently, President Obama told Geithner, close down Citibank. Sheila Bair said, look, we've just rescued IndyMac. We're in the business of bailing out banks. The banks could go under here or in Ireland or in Greece, and all the depositors would be okay, up to the normal insured deposit. The check transfer system would be okay. The credit card system would be okay. The only people that would lose would be the 1%, the bondholders and bankers at the top of the economic pyramid. So the banks are trying to hold governments up for ransom, threatening to shut down the whole system when in practice, we know from the United States, the governments could very simply take them over, open the next day, no problem at all. So it's an unnecessary pushing of populations into poverty, emigration, and making the economy very high cost because all of this public debt that's being created is going to be added to the cost of living and doing business.
All right, now you mentioned there something at the top there that I want to come back to. You said 100 years ago, the economy was a tension between labor and capital for the most part, but that's not really the case anymore. We've entered a post-labor economy where now the tension is between savers versus speculators. What I mean by that is the speculators are the borrowers, they control the governments, they want incredibly low interest rates, and the savers, of course, they want higher interest rates, they want capital formation, they want a more sound economic policies to guide them. Is that a fair characterization?
No.
Okay.
I don't think anyone wants high interest rates. Savers would like high interest rates. But the tragedy of today's financial system is that you've locked people's retirement accounts into trying to plug them into a financial system that's based on financial returns. And most of these financial returns have been paid not out of earning income, not out of tangible investment in new plant and equipment or factories or hiring labor, but by asset price inflation. That is by credit pushing up the price of housing, by mortgage lending, by takeover credit, by banks just flooding the economy with credit. Now, the amazing thing is that commercial banks say, wait a minute, don't let a central bank create credit, because if you do that, that's inflationary. But we've seen an enormous inflation of housing prices, stock market prices, and the biggest bond market rally in history over the last 30 years by the commercial banks flooding the whole economy with credit.
Right. Well, flooding the system with bank credit, of course, only works if you can keep interest rates near 0%, as they've been able to do. 20 years ago under Clinton, of course, they talked about the bond vigilantes who were there to offer some checks and balances. But now the bond vigilantes are gone, right? Because quantitative easing and these other policies, the governments buy back their own debt. So there is no checks and balances, right?
That's correct, at least for the United States. As long as your debt is owed in your own currency and your government can print it, there's no problem at all, unlike the case in the European Central Bank.
Okay, now, Dr. Hudson, in your latest piece for a German newspaper, you write that banks use debt to control governments. So this is kind of following up on what we're talking about here. So what would be the fight back? How would people, fight back? My thought was that people would want higher interest rates as a way to, it's like showing garlic to a vampire. It scares the bloodsuckers away. But I guess that's not what your thought. How would you get rid of these guys?
In the case of Greece, you just say, I'm sorry, we can't pay. And if we have to choose between pushing the economy into depression or not paying creditors, we're not going to pay the creditors, especially not the vulture bond buyers. So you write down the debts to the ability to pay. A debt write-down, or in the case of Greece, just a debt repudiation, saying we're not going to pay, just like Argentina did.
Right, and the argument, of course, is that if a country defaults on its debt, then their credit rating is shot and they'll never be able to sell bonds again. But that's not true, is it?
It hasn't been true for the last 500 years.
Right. Well, clearly we're at a point of pushback with the Arab Spring and other elements going on. Occupy Wall Street. Do you see a broader theme here? We're connecting Occupy Wall Street, the Arab Spring, this new internet activism, which was against the SOPA people laws, the intellectual property laws. Is this all part of a growing theme? Is it all coming together? Is there going to be finally a confrontation between these two opposing forces?
There is a preparation for a confrontation. One of the purposes of the Occupy Wall Street was to say, look, the system, marginal changes are not going to help the system. The system is so much over indebted. Wall Street is so corrupt that you have to basically change the whole financial system. There isn't a political party or even a doctrine committed to that yet. There are a group of us working with the Occupy Wall Street people, putting together a overall platform and set of demands that in the next few months are going to be made public.
That's late breaking news, I must say. That's very interesting. So you're behind the scenes working with groups with a new initiative coming, hopefully when it gets a little warmer outside. Certainly the cold weather is not helping things. Now, you wrote Super Imperialism. What are your thoughts on Republican candidate Ron Paul's anti-imperialism and the fact that the mainstream media in America refuses to even mention his name when he comes up in second place in a presidential primary, for example?
Obviously, I like the position that he's taken against American military involvement abroad. It's the same position that the candidate I'm associated with, Dennis Kucinich, is taking among the Democrats. I don't agree with Mr. Paul's attempt to get rid of Social Security and other government spending and his sort of funny Austrian economics. But none of the Republicans basically want to wind down America's military. Just the opposite. They're all trying to get campaign contributions. And you can see from what they've said at the debate that the way to get campaign contributions is to do what Mr. Gingrich and Romney have done. They said we're Israel's best friends. That's where the money is. They're going for it. And to take a position like Mr. Paul's means that you're going to rule out a lot of campaign contributors. The view in most of the press here is that people vote pretty much in proportion to the money that's spent on television advertising. And if you don't have campaign contributors at the very high level from the corporations and the interest groups, then you're not going to be able to buy television time. And if you don't buy television time, you're not going to get much vote. and on that basis, they assume Mr. Paul isn't a likely candidate. So what he's doing, as he says, is only running an information campaign. He doesn't expect to get the nomination. He does try to get the issues discussed, but the press doesn't want to discuss the issue because the press in this country seems very much in favor of going to war with Iran. Mr. Paul is the only Republican who seems to be opposing that.
All right, Dr. Hudson, I want to digress just a little bit because you mentioned Austrian economics, and because of Ron Paul's candidacy, this is mentioned often, the term Austrian economics. And as a professor now, is it possible in just a 30-second clip or so, is it possible to kind of summarize when people refer to Austrian economics what they are referring to? Is that possible to summarize it?
I can summarize it in one sentence. They hate the government and they want to centralize planning. But they want to centralize planning not in government, but in the hands of bankers. And so they're trying to get actually Democrats, democratic people, and the working class and the middle class to say, if you get rid of government controls, if you deregulate the banks, you don't have consumer protection, you let the criminals take over, the criminals will run the economy just wonderfully, get rid of the government, centralize planning in Citibank, JP Morgan, and Bank of America, and you'll have utopia. That's insane, but that's what they believe.
Okay, so it's something of a market-based priesthood where the markets are infallible.
You just had MF Global steal $1.2 billion worth of customers' funds. To be a thief is not market-based. If I come to you, hold a gun to you at the ATM and say your money or your life, that is not a market transaction, Max. That's crime.
Fair enough. Now, how come you're not at Davos, Dr. Hudson?
What do I have to say listening to a lot of public relations statements?
Well, this is a good point. And at Davos, of course, the theme this year, as I understand it, is that capitalism needs to be reinterpreted or looked at again. Prime Minister David Cameron in the UK is also talking about a so-called moral capitalism. Now, this is a brief pause a brief interregnum before the vultures get back a lot of credit with the next big easing of credit, and they have a little a crisis of conscience, or is this really a new era, do you think?
What you really need is George Orwell going to the meeting to talk about doublethink. What they're talking about is a power grab, an attempt to replace democracy with an oligarchy, and they're trying to represent this as a populist rhetoric, as euphemism, and say it's all for your own good, that we're taking over the economy. We're getting rid of your elected governments. We're turning over the planning power to the banks, and it's all for your own good. I don't have much to say about that. Now, there was a counterpart to Davos last summer, and that was in Yaroslavl in Russia, that I think had a much more congenial set of attendees, and that's where I preferred to go than to go to Davos. All they're doing is trying to figure out how do we stick the European taxpayer with bailing out the banks so that we can increase our 1% of money even higher and impoverish the rest of the 99% even lower. That's really what they're discussing, but they don't phrase it that way. They talk in a different kind of terminology, but that's really the substance.
You can help me understand something here going on in Europe. First, Greece is led down the path toward financial nightmare when they were tricked into joining the euro. Remember, Goldman Sachs was doing a bit of accounting fraud. Now that they are entering all kinds of problems, they're being told that they can't import oil from Iran anymore because of this huge embargo with Iranian oil, which of course would just put the knife in and twist it for the Greek economy. How can they get away with this, saying that they can't import Iranian oil? This seems to be a bit bizarre to me. What are your thoughts?
Well, the person running Greece is an appointee of the central bank. He was not an elected person. If the central bank say, well, look, the voters voted for the wrong people. We're putting in our people. We're not going to have a referendum on anything. We're imposing a dictatorship, and we don't like Iran because we'd like to grab its oil like we're trying to grab Libya's oil. soil, then of course you're going to have this. This is not a voluntary policy by the Greek people who were out in the streets yesterday demonstrating, as they were in Italy, demonstrating the fact that, look, we're not a part of this. And if you, in the European Central Bank and the bondholders and the vulture funds, really think you can collect from us by privatizing our property and taxing us, we're out in the streets to let you know that this is not a democratically determined policy. And as soon as we are able to elect our own representative, we're going to annul these debts and reverse the privatization. So these demonstrations you're seeing in Greece, Italy, Portugal are giving the creditors fair warning that the war is back in business.
All right, now your comments on a piece of news that just came across in the last day or so. European and American embargo. As a result of it, India and China will start buying oil using gold from Iran. So they're using gold now has suddenly become, a reserve currency or a currency. Is this going to undermine the dollar in these transactions going forward? And it seems like gold suddenly is being used in a very high level reserve currency way. Your thoughts?
The intention is certainly to undermine the dollar, because when you say the dollar is a currency, what you really mean is the dollars that are put into the world economy by the U.S. balance of payments deficit. And that balance of payments deficit is largely military. So the dollar is an embodiment of America's military spending abroad to surround the world with military bases. Now, China and Russia are not only paying in gold, they are developing swap agreements to pay in their own currency, which they're now backing with gold. Both China and Russia produce gold, and they've been building up their gold reserves, not by buying in the open market, but just by buying the gold that's produced in their own country. They're going back to the situation as it was before 1971, when President Nixon took the dollar off gold as a result of the Vietnam War. And that was why I wrote the book on superimperialism to begin with. Remember that throughout the 1960s, every penny of the U.S. balance of payments deficit was on military account. I have the charts in the book. The private sector was exactly in balance, and the U.S. government actually makes money on foreign aid by the process of tying aid. So the dollars that were being pushed into the economy were as a result of military spending, and when these dollars would end up in Vietnam, they'd be cashed into France, and General de Gaulle in France, but also Germany and Japan, would cash in these dollar inflows for U.S. gold until there was no more gold cover for the dollar. America's balance of payments deficit ran out of gold, forced the world into the dollar standard, and henceforth, the world has depended on paper dollars being thrown into the economy, not only by military spending, but by American investors just buying out and privatizing foreign resources. 2 years ago in Yekaterinburg in Russia, there was a meeting between the BRIC countries, Russia, China, Brazil, and India, with Iran as a observer, saying we've got to stop this. And the way to stop the American military expansion is to bring about to stop accepting dollars. And to do that, we have to replace it with our own currency. And whether or not that's with gold is less important than the fact that it's not the dollar. And the idea is to phase the dollar out of the world payment system so that the United States will have no money at all to continue the military encirclement of Eurasia as it's now doing.
All right, we've got about 1 minute left, so I just want to keep on this gold theme. So a couple of points. So if you could address the idea of gold coming back as an anchor currency or a reserve currency, your thoughts on that. And in all fairness, not to bring up the Austrian school again, but I believe that they do make a reference to gold as the only viable currency out there. But I know might have some other thoughts.
The Austrians talk about a gold-based currency. They're talking about domestic currency and domestic paper money. Other countries today, in terms of the dollar standard, are talking about gold as a means of settlement of balance of payments deficits among countries. So they're talking about gold internationally, not as the basis of a domestic currency. And in that sense, gold is a peaceful metal because no country today has enough gold to go to war with anybody else. If you have a gold constraint of taking the payment in gold or a non-U.S. dollar currency, then countries can't afford to go to war, and you'll have a much more peaceful world.
Right, and it does also offer a check and balance on the kind of shenanigans we've seen on Wall Street, because the Wall Street is a Ponzi scheme where they keep introducing layer and layer and layer of debt based on very spurious claims of collateral. But if there is gold and it is accountable, then that does remove a lot of that ability to create these massive multi-layer Ponzi schemes, correct?
Well, I think you're being too nice, Max. When you just steal depositors' money and your clients' money, that's not a Ponzi scheme. That's what my colleague, Professor Bill Black, calls control fraud. We're dealing with a huge fraud, and the financial sector has turned more into a group of gangs than even debt pyramiding and even a Ponzi scheme. They've gone way beyond Ponzi.
So the MF Global scandal, of course, when you see one roach, there's usually other roaches around. Is this the beginning of a new period where this kind of confiscation, whether it's in these segregated accounts or maybe in pension accounts, where these embattled banks just simply steal the money? I think J.P. Morgan was implicated in the MF Global scandal as simply getting ahead of all the creditors and taking all the money for themselves in a highly illegal fashion.
That's right. J.P. Morgan was just as guilty in all of this. It's all come out. They just grabbed the money and held on to it and forced MF Global under. Essentially, financial fraud has been decriminalized in America. And this is leading foreigners, especially Europeans, to say, we're pulling our money out. And in fact, it's leading Americans just to pull their money out and keeping their money in credit unions, in non-banks. There's a perception that Wall Street has just been taken over by gangsters.
All right, Dr. Michael Hudson, we're out of time. Thanks for being on the Edge.
Thank you very much, Max.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of On the Edge with me, Max Keiser. I want to thank my guest, Michael Hudson. You can find him at michael-hudson.com. If you want to send me an email, please do so at ontheedge@presstv.com. Until next time, Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.